Her father sold her to buy a gun, but a Comanche warrior traded his horse to set her free. Dust blew low across the dry-packed ground of Antelope Ridge's open market. The heat hung still, and the crowd parted just enough to witness what should never be sold. "She'll do," Harlan Crow said, voice cold, flat, like the blade of a shovel striking stone. He stood across from 3 outlaws, one of them spinning a Colt .45 slow between his fingers. Harlan's cavalry coat hung heavy despite the heat, his boots coated in dried mud. His hand rested on the wagon rail behind him like he owned something worth guarding. "She's clean, she works, and she keeps quiet," Harlan added. "And she ain't mine by blood, just dead weight left behind by her mother." The girl stood beside the wagon. Clara, 19, hair braided tight, skin the color of wheat under sun. Her eyes, low and unreadable, stayed locked on the ground. She didn't blink, didn't beg. Her silence wasn't obedience, it was armor. The leader of the outlaws, a man with a red scarf and rotting teeth, raised an eyebrow. "You trading your girl for a gun?" "I'm trading what I've got for what I need," Harlan snapped. "A man with a weapon lives longer than one with a burden." One of the outlaws stepped closer to Clara, circling her slow. "She's got a spine, might try to run." Harlan smirked. "She knows better." "She got a voice?" "Like a damned church bell," Harlan muttered. "But she's been taught when to keep it shut." The outlaw stopped in front of Clara and lifted her chin with 2 fingers. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. "Pretty thing," he said. "Scar on her wrist?" "Earned that learning to obey." With a grunt, the outlaw tossed the Colt onto the crate between them. "Deal." Harlan snatched the gun like it was redemption itself, flipping the chamber open with greedy fingers. He did not look at Clara, not once. One of the men grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the horses, tied off just past the last stall. Her feet moved without resistance, but her shoulders stayed stiff, as if refusing to let her soul follow. Vendors nearby went quiet, but no one spoke. Behind a tanner's tent, hidden from the center of the market, a figure stood, still as stone. Tall, shoulders wrapped in deerskin, braid falling over his back, his face shadowed beneath the edge of a sun-worn hat, his eyes dark and steady, followed Clara alone. He watched as she was taken. He watched as Harlan Crow stroked the gun like it was gold. Then he turned and walked away, quiet as dusk. He had seen that girl before, and she had not been for sale. They called him Weekapaw. Among the Comanche, his name meant he who does not look away. He had seen too much to blink. Too much death. Too much betrayal. He had walked across burning plains and through the bones of his people, not because he had nowhere to go, but because no place in this world could hold what he had lost. He lived now near the broken edges of old Comanche land, in a quiet fold of prairie where wind whispered through grass like voices that had no mouths. He hunted alone, spoke little, and kept his horse tethered close, not for fear of thieves, but for reverence. That horse was no ordinary creature. Luaku, they called it, Old Flame. It had carried his grandfather into war, carried his father into exile, and now carried Weekapaw through the silence of survival. He was sharpening a flint knife near the fire when he heard the name. A trader had passed through 2 nights prior, drunk on whiskey and pride, spitting stories into the dark like seeds, most Weekapaw ignored. But this one, they sold her right in the market, can you believe it? Girl with eyes like dry water. Name was Clara, I think. Her pa gave her up for a Colt .45, just handed her over like a sack of grain. The blade in Weekapaw's hand stopped mid-mash mark. His eyes did not lift, but his breath paused, just long enough for memory to slip in like a draft under a door. Clara? He had not spoken that name in years, had not needed to. It lived inside him, stored away like a flame kept in flint, waiting. He remembered. She had been a girl, no more than 10, lost near the river, surrounded by wolves, small, wild things with ribs like razors. He had not meant to be there, but he had heard her crying, not loud, not like someone begging for help, but soft, like someone already giving up. He had scared the wolves off with a whistle only the old ones knew. She had looked up at him with eyes full of shock and wonder. He did not speak her language then, and she did not speak his, but they had shared something that needed no words. Trust, silent and sudden. Before he left, he carved a symbol into the flat rock beside the stream, a spiral flame, the mark of his clan. Then he was gone. But not from her, not truly. Now, years later, her name returned to him, not as a coincidence, but as a call. At dawn, Wekopa packed his things. He did not tell the elders. He did not explain. There would be those who said it was not his place, that the white man's world was not his to interfere with, that this Clara was no longer the child by the river, but a woman in chains, bound by the same system that had broken their people. But Wekopa had never listened to the fearful. He saddled Luaku, tied up dried venison and a satchel of ground herbs, slung his bow across his back, and wrapped the carved flamestone in red cloth. It had waited long enough. He rode out under a pale sky, dust kicking up in long shadows behind him, past old markers where buffalo once roamed, past grave mounds left untended, where mothers had buried sons with songs no one remembered how to sing. He passed white towns where no one looked him in the eye, where men spat near his boots and women clutched their children tighter. He said nothing. Let them stare, let them forget. He was not there for them. He was there for a girl whose eyes had once looked at him not with fear, but with hope. He did not know where they had taken her, not yet, but he knew she had been sold. And Wekopa had never believed a soul could be sold if someone still remembered its worth. So he rode, not for war, not for revenge, but for a promise made in silence, and a fire he had once left burning in stone. The camp sat low in a basin of dried brush and broken rock, its fires flickering like hungry eyes in the dark. Horses shifted nervously at their posts. Tents were staked carelessly in the wind, and laughter, rough, guttural, rose up with the scent of roasted meat and spilled liquor. Wekopa approached alone, his horse tethered half a mile back in silence. He moved like wind across the sand, his footsteps forgotten before they were made. The men around the fire looked up when he entered their circle. One stood, hand instinctively drifting toward the pistol at his side. But Wekopa didn't reach for his bow. He stood tall, unblinking. "I have come for the girl," he said calmly. The scarred leader, the same man who had taken the Colt 45 from Clara's stepfather, grinned. He was sitting on a barrel, cleaning his boots with a blade. "Manhattan said so," he said. "And which girl would that be? We've got a few now, trade runs good this season." "Clara." The man's grin widened into something sharp. "Pretty one, quiet. Looks at you like she's already halfway to heaven. Why would a Comanche ride all this way for a white girl? He is not yours to keep." "Maybe not, but she was bought fair." He stood, stretching. "You think you can just take her?" Wekopa stepped forward and placed a small red-wrapped stone on the crate between them. "I wager—" The men looked at one another, confused. "Fight. Just me. One of you, no weapons. If I lose, you keep the stone and I leave. If I win, she walks free." One of the outlaws laughed. "You serious?" But the scarred man stared at Wekopa, something hardening in his jaw. "That stone worth something to you?" "It was my mother's." That changed the air. They made a circle with crates and lanterns. One of the younger outlaws stepped forward, flexing his fists, eager. The scarred leader held up a hand. "No, I'll do it." He pulled off his coat. He was thick-bodied, scarred deep along the ribs, a man who had survived too much to be afraid. Wekopa stepped into the circle without ceremony. The wind died. No fist flew at first, just circling, watching, waiting. Then the outlaw lunged, fast, heavy. Wekopa ducked low, swept his leg, but the man stayed on his feet. They clashed again, elbow, shoulder, knee. Flesh slammed into flesh. Dust rose. Clara, tied near a wagon wheel, watched in silence, her breath caught tight in her throat. The outlaw landed a blow to Wekopa's ribs. He grunted, stumbled, but did not fall. He waited. Then, when the outlaw's stance opened for half a second, Wekopa struck, A sharp pivot, a knee to the gut, a fist to the jaw. The man hit the ground with a thud, dust pluming like smoke. No one moved. Wikopa stepped back, breathing hard, blood trailing from his mouth. I won't. The scarred man wiped his lip, laughing darkly as he sat up. You Comanche fight like devils, I'll give you that. He nodded to the man guarding Clara. Let her go. But as Wikopa stepped toward her, the outlaw added with a crooked smile, Don't think you've saved her, she ain't free, just borrowed. Someone else'll come looking, that kind of girl always brings trouble. Wikopa said nothing. He untied Clara's wrists, steady hands brushing the rope away like dust. She looked up at him. There was something in his eyes, familiar, but she didn't know from where. He didn't speak to her, just handed her a small canteen and motioned toward the dark, where the trees waited. They walked in silence, away from the fire, from the men who bought and sold what should never have had a price. Behind them, the outlaw's laughter faded into the night. Ahead, only stars. Clara walked beside him, glancing at his face in the moonlight, at the braid, the calm. She knew him, or felt like she did. And then, memory stirred. 10 years ago, a girl lost near a stream, feet bleeding, breath shallow, wolves circling. A boy, not much older, emerged from the trees, eyes dark as midnight. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't fought. He had whistled, a strange sound, sharp and rising, and the wolves had slunk away. Before he vanished, he picked up a smooth stone, carved a symbol onto its surface with a piece of bone, a spiral flame. Then he'd placed it by the water's edge and disappeared. She had never forgotten that night. She had held the image like a secret between ribs. For years, she had wondered if it was real or just something her mind had made to survive. Now, walking beside this silent man, her heart stirred. She looked at his belt and saw, hanging just above the satchel, a small red-wrapped stone. Clara's breath caught. She did not yet know, but she remembered the fire. They walked beneath a dead canopy, where the trees no longer bloomed and the earth still whispered of blood. The forest had no name now. Folks said it was cursed, that screams still clung to the branches like moss. Decades ago, soldiers and warriors had bled into this soil until the birds stopped singing. No one walked here willingly, but Wikopa did. Clara followed him, her steps cautious, heart tight. The farther they traveled, the quieter the world became. No bird song, no wind, just the crackle of twigs beneath boots and the distant breath of ghosts. What happened here? She asked. Wikopa's voice was low. A lie, dressed in a treaty, died in flame. Clara didn't ask more. She felt it in her skin, the weight of what had once happened here. They made camp near the base of a broken rock, shadows stretching long as the sun dipped. Clara gathered wood while Wikopa struck flint. She noticed how he built the fire, not in a circle, but in a spiral pattern, deliberate, symbolic. That night they ate in silence. She watched the way he touched nothing without intention, how he always sat with his back to the open, ears tilted toward the wind. Just before dawn, the stillness broke. Low growls echoed through the brush. The fire hissed in the cold air. Clara shot up, heart hammering. From the dark they came, silent shadows with eyes like embers. Wolves. A half-dozen, maybe more, circling the camp's edge. Hungry, coordinated. Clara scrambled to her feet, grabbing a stick from the fire, hands shaking. Wikopa. He was already standing. He did not grab his bow. He did not reach for the knife on his hip. Instead, he took one slow step toward the circling beasts. His eyes met theirs, not as challenge, but as something older. Then he whistled. It was not loud. It wasn't sharp. It rose like smoke, curling through the trees in a pattern no human song could mimic. The wolves stilled. The lead wolf, taller than the rest, bared its teeth, then paused. Something passed between them, unseen, unspoken. And just like that, the beasts turned. One by one, they melted back into the forest, vanishing like fog into underbrush. Clara stood frozen, breath ragged, stick trembling in her grip. Wicopa looked back at her, calm, as if nothing had happened. She dropped the stick. Her voice came quiet, nearly broken. Why didn't they attack? Wicopa crouched to tend the fire again. Wolves don't bite what knows fire. Clara's mouth parted. Her knees gave slightly as she sat on a fallen log, eyes wide with memory. "Fire," she whispered. Then her hands went to her chest. The flame on the stone. Her breath caught. "That night by the river, I was 10. I was surrounded and—" She looked at him, truly looked. "You carved it," she said. Wicopa said nothing, but he nodded, slow, barely there, a gesture soft as a breath. Clara felt heat rise in her chest, behind her ribs. Tears welled without warning. "I waited," she said, voice cracking. "I waited for years. I thought you were a dream. I thought I made you up to survive." Wicopa stood again, brushing ash from his hands. "You survived, anyway." She stared at him, overwhelmed by the sudden, vast weight of recognition. This was not just the man who freed her. This was the boy who once knelt in the dark to give her back her life. She stepped toward him slowly, heart pounding like hooves on dry earth. "I waited for you," she whispered. "A long time." He did not move, but his expression changed, just slightly. Something behind his eyes eased. He reached out, not to touch, but to offer. A quiet presence, a space beside the fire no one had ever held for her before. She sat there, close, not touching, but near enough to feel his breath rise and fall. And in that circle of dying flame, something shifted between them. It was no longer gratitude. It was something deeper. Recognition. A beginning, reborn. The storm had come without warning, thick as smoke and just as choking. Sand whipped across their faces like shards of glass. Wicopa had covered Clara with his cloak and led her by hand through the blind gale until they found shelter beneath a stone arch. Ancient, wind-carved, like the rib cage of the earth itself. Now, as dusk fell over a sky still heavy with grit, Clara sat curled against the stone, hair clinging to her damp face. Her dress was soaked in sweat and dust, her boots caked in mud. She shivered, not from cold, but from something deeper, exhaustion that had nowhere left to hide. Wicopa moved without sound. He gathered dry branches from the leeward side of the rock, snapped them between strong fingers, and built a fire with the patience of a man who knew flame was more than heat. It was memory. He struck flint and coaxed the spark to life, shielding it with his palms. The fire grew, small but steady, casting gold light across the hollow space they shared. Clara watched as he knelt beside her, pulled her boots off gently, and took a thin piece of driftwood from his satchel. Without a word, he began scraping the hardened mud from the leather soles. Careful, thorough, not for speed, but for care. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. He didn't answer. When her boots were clean, he laid them beside the fire to dry, then turned to her cloak, shaking out the sand, smoothing the folds. She sat still, eyes wide, throat tight. Then he stood, moved to the back of the cave, and returned with a handful of long grasses and a strip of torn leather from his own tunic. He sat cross-legged, his fingers deft and quiet as he wove the strands together, twisting, looping, binding. She watched, puzzled. When he finished, he held out the woven strip. A simple band, nothing fancy, strong, tied at the end with the worn leather cord. "What's that?" she asked, brows furrowing. "A headband," he said. "For who?" His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "For you." She blinked. "Why?" "So your hair won't blind you. The road ahead is long." Clara stared at the band in his hand, then at his face, and something broke. Not in pain, not in fear, but in recognition of a tenderness she had never been offered. She took the band with trembling fingers, held it to her chest, and bit her lip as tears welled in her eyes. Not because of what they had survived, but because someone, finally, wanted her to see. She turned away quickly, wiping her cheek with her sleeve, ashamed of how much it moved her. But Wicopa said nothing. He only turned back to the fire, pulled out a pouch of dried meat, and offered her a share. They ate in silence, not awkward, but soft, full of the kind of quiet that holds space, not distance. The wind had died now, only the fire cracked, and their breathing mingled in the cool dark. When they finished, Weekober adjusted the fire, then leaned back against the stone wall. Clara sat beside him, her fingers still holding the headband. She looked at him, not just his face, but his presence. How he sat still, solid, like a tree rooted deep. How he never once asked for anything, even as he gave. And slowly, like a tide creeping in, she shifted. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Weekoper did not move. He did not flinch. He simply let her rest there. Her eyes closed, not because she was weak, but because she finally felt safe. For the first time in years, Clara fell asleep not in fear, but in trust. And beside her, Weekoper stayed awake, watching the fire, keeping it alive. The trail turned pale as they neared the edge of the borderlands, where the land began to open wide like a breath held too long. Cacti grew thicker, and the air took on the scent of dust, metal, and lawlessness. Beyond the next ridge lay the first rail line, proof of white towns, government eyes, and wanted signs. Clara could feel it. So could Weekoper. They were only a few miles from the edge when 3 men stepped out from behind a rock outcrop, rifles slung, faces cracked by sun and greed. The lead bounty hunter wore a long coat and a badge bent from old tin. His teeth were brown with tobacco. He pointed at Clara. "Well, well," he drawled. "Ain't you the one, pale girl, dark braid? Word is you were bought cheap and then vanished. Folks want answers, and there's a $50.00 bounty on your return." Clara's stomach turned. One of the younger men spit into the dirt. "Looks like we just got paid." The third man, older, thinner, said nothing, but his eyes never left Weekoper. Clara stepped closer to Weekoper, her hand trembling. "She ain't yours," the leader growled, "and we ain't here to argue law. We're here to collect." One moved forward, gun twitching in his grip. Clara opened her mouth, but Weekoper raised his hand gently, a silent signal. He stepped forward. Then, without threat, without anger, he set his bow down on the ground. The bounty hunters stiffened. "Do not touch her," Weekoper said. The man sneered. "Or what? You gonna whistle the wolves again?" Weekoper didn't blink. Instead, he reached into the leather pouch at his side and slowly pulled out 3 things. First, a small bundle of crushed herbs wrapped in elk hide. Second, a pinch of reddish earth, held in a folded cloth. And last, a smooth black stone carved with symbols, its edge wrapped in copper thread. A stone talisman, the last totem passed to him from his mother. He walked to the center of the trail and knelt. "This," he said quietly, placing them on the ground, "has more value than the bounty." The wind paused. "This medicine," he gestured to the herbs, "can draw fever from the lungs. This soil," he pointed, "is from sacred ground. It heals sickness in horses. And this," his hand rested on the carved stone, "can be traded with the Mexicans near the southern towns. They still remember what it means." He looked up, voice steady. "You can take these, or you can take my life, but not her." The silence that followed was not empty. It was taut, humming, ancient. The older bounty hunter stepped forward, staring at the stone. "I've seen one of those," he murmured. "Back in Durango. The priest there kept one behind the altar, called it a key, said it could buy peace or war." The leader looked unsure now. "Is this some trick?" "No," the old man said. "It's real and rare. We'd be fools to touch that girl and lose this." A long pause. Then the leader cursed under his breath, kicked the dirt, and nodded once. "Fine," he muttered. "Keep the girl. But know this," he spat near Weekoper's feet. "You just traded a woman for history." The men mounted and rode off. When they were gone, Clara stood frozen. He stared at the place where the stone had rested, at the empty patch of earth. "That was your mother's," she whispered. "Your last tie to her. Your people." Weekoper didn't speak at first. Then he looked at her, calm as always. "I kept something more important." "What?" Ugh. Clara couldn't hold it in. The tears came fast, hot, sudden. Not because she was sad, but because for the first time in her life, someone had given up everything, not to possess her, but to protect her. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and buried her face in his chest. And there, in the middle of a barren trail, she held on like the world had finally stopped taking. They were close now. The terrain shifted as the sun dipped low. Less wind, more hush. Trees grew older here, wider, their roots thick and visible above the ground, like veins reaching toward something buried. The air changed, too. Clara could feel it in her chest, like a drumbeat under her ribs. Bacopa slowed his steps as they approached a broad swath of clearing. It looked almost ordinary, open earth, scattered stones, dry grass. But there was a feeling to it, the kind of silence that holds breath, and memory, and things left unsaid. Clara glanced at the cracked ground. Charcoal still clung to the dirt, buried deep in creases time had not yet healed. "My father once spoke of this place," she said softly. "Said the army burned a whole Comanche village here, lit the homes before sunrise, shot anyone who ran." Bacopa didn't answer, but his face shifted just slightly. Enough for her to know the story had not been a tale, it had been a wound. They kept walking. Then, just beyond a tangle of mesquite, she saw it. A rock wall, tall and rough, half hidden behind vines and wind-blown dirt. It rose like a memory refusing to be buried. Something in its presence made her stop. Bacopa walked ahead and gently pulled the vines away, and Clara gasped. There, carved into the face of the rock, were figures. Dozens. Not colored, not painted, but etched, clean, deep, purposeful. One showed a small girl by a riverbank, surrounded by wolves. Another showed a taller figure, standing between her and the beasts, arms outstretched in defiance. A third showed a spiral flame between them, rising, centered. She stared, heart pounding. The images weren't just stories. They were hers. This is... A man who drove around last night, looking for the things that haunted men, might blatantly haunt you. This is us. Catherine, look in the face. I don't know who you are. Bacopa said nothing. She turned toward him slowly. Who did this? He met her gaze. His voice was low. I did, when I was 13. She blinked, her breath caught between ribs. I thought I would never see you again, he said. I came back to that river, but you were gone. So I carved it into stone. I didn't have words in your language, but I had this. I thought maybe one day someone would see it and know. Clara stepped closer to the rock face, tracing the edges with her fingertips. I thought I imagined that night, she whispered. I thought maybe it was something I made up, just to believe I had been saved by something kind. She placed her palm flat against the spiral flame. I did survive, somehow, but it wasn't just for me. She turned back to Bacopa, eyes full and shining. I survived, to be standing here, now, with you. A wind passed through the trees, soft but sure, like it had been listening all along. Bacopa took one slow step forward. Clara stepped into him, arms wrapping around his waist. And he held her. Not tightly, not out of desperation, but like he had been waiting his whole life to hold something that would not disappear. The fire between them had never been wild. It had been steady, silent, like embers buried beneath sand. Now it glowed. They stood beneath the carvings, beneath their story, written in stone where no one could erase it. Not time, not violence, not forgetting. Here, where blood had once soaked the dirt. Two people, scarred, surviving, seen, held each other beneath the sky. And the past finally bowed its head. Spring bled soft across the Comanche plains. The hills turned lavender, dusted with wildflowers that blanketed the ground like echoes of forgotten dreams. The wind no longer stung, it carried warmth, life, and the faint scent of cedar smoke from cooking fires lit at dusk. Clara lived now among Bacopa's people, not as a guest, not as a symbol, but as someone learning how to stay. She wore a simple tunic dyed in earth tones, her hair braided with dried grasses and beads the children gave her. She taught the little ones to draw with charcoal and colored sand, to make pictures that told stories when words felt too small. Around the fire she listened to the elders recount the legends, the fox that tricked death, the moon that mourned its twin, and she memorized their cadence. She learned to speak Comanche slowly, carefully. Each syllable felt like stepping onto sacred land. But she did not rush. Some words, like forgiveness and belonging, had to be earned with silence. Wacopa stayed close, never hovering, never pressing. He carved tools from bone, trained the boys in archery, and kept the night watch when the wind howled. But he always left a space beside him, by the fire, under the trees, along the river. Clara came to understand. That space was for her, not as a prize, not as a debt repaid, but as a place someone had made for her to belong, if she chose it. And she had. On the night of the full moon, the tribe gathered in a wide circle, drums beating low and slow like the old heart of the earth. Smoke rose from the fire pit, twisting into shapes above their heads. Elders sat with fur-lined cloaks, young warriors stood in silence, and children giggled at the edge, until their mothers hushed them gently. It was a night for stories, a sacred tradition. One by one, members of the tribe stood to speak, some with voice, others with song or motion. Then, the elder matriarch, her hair silver as snow, her spine straight as a bow, called Clara forward. Clara froze, then stood. The firelight caught her face, her eyes, the soft line of a scar that no longer made her hide. Her fingers were stained with ink and charcoal, her voice shook slightly. But she walked into the center of the circle and looked at them, at Wacopa, at the children, at the faces that had waited for her to choose this moment. She took a deep breath and began. "Long ago," she said, in English first, her voice low but clear, "there was a girl, and her father gave her away, for a gun, a Colt 45. He said she was worth less than the metal in his hand." Some in the circle stirred. She switched to Comanche, halting but strong, each word struck with intent. "But then," she continued, "a man came, not with coins, not with chains. He came with the fire of his people, and gave up his last piece of home, not to own her, but to let her walk free, to let her see her own path." The fire crackled behind her. He did not promise her safety, or love, or a place to hide. She paused. He only gave her space, to breathe, to choose, to become. Her voice caught, but she kept going. "And now, that girl is not for sale anymore. She is not someone's mistake or someone's debt." She looked at Wacopa, eyes brimming. "She is the keeper of a story about a man who did not speak much, but who taught her how to speak, who did not try to save her, but gave her the courage to live." A hush fell over the circle. Clara turned to face the fire, her final words carried not in defiance, but in truth. "I am not the girl who was sold." She placed a hand over her heart. "I am the keeper of a legend, and that legend—" She looked once more at Wacopa. "Looks like a man who knew how to stay silent, how to love without owning, and how to carry fire so someone else could be reborn." The fire danced between them. No one clapped. That was not their way. But heads bowed, and hearts, once cautious, leaned in closer. Later that night, when the fire had burned low and the moon watched gently from above, Wacopa took her hand, not to lead her, not to guide her, but simply to walk beside her. And Clara smiled, because this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one she would tell again and again, so no one would forget. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable ride through Her Father Sold Her to Buy a Gun, but a Comanche warrior traded his horse to set her free. In the land where freedom was bartered and names were nearly lost to dust, one woman found her voice, not through rescue, but through love that asked nothing, yet gave everything. And one man, silent, steady, became the flame that helped her see again, not just the path ahead, but the power within. If this story moved your heart, If it made you believe that scars can become stories, and stories can become legends, then ride with us again. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, where every tale honors the grit, grace, and love that bloomed in the hardest of places. Because in the Wild West, some bullets missed, but the right hearts never did.